الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم معلم إبراهيم علمنا ومفهم سليمان فهمنا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. So today we're on the chapter that's talking about the danger of Shirk billahi azza wa jal, to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the author, he says we read the Arabic first. We're not going to read the whole chapter. There's a lot of evidences. We'll read some of it and then inshallah explain it. قال الله عز وجل إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء ومن يشرك بالله فقد افترى إثما عظيما. وقال تعالى إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به الآية. وقال تعالى لقد كفر الذين قالوا إن الله هو المسيح ابن مريم وقال المسيح يا بني إسرائيل اعبدوا الله ربي وربكم إنه من يشرك بالله فقد حرم الله عليه الجنة ومأواه النار وما للظالمين من أنصار. وقال تعالى حنفاء لله غير مشركين به ومن يشرك بالله فكأنما خر من السماء فتخطفه الطير أو تهوي به الريح في مكان سحيق. الآيات. وعن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله عنه قال أتى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم رجل فقال يا رسول الله ما الموجبتان؟ فقال من مات لا يشرك بالله شيئا دخل الجنة ومن مات يشرك بالله شيئا دخل النار. وعنه أيضا رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من لقي الله لا يشرك به شيئا دخل الجنة ومن لقيه يشرك به شيئا دخل النار. So here he begins by saying that the danger of shirk billahi azza wa jal, and he mentions a number of verses, but before we go into that we want to know what does shirk mean and why is it so dangerous. So first of all, shirk is that you associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are categories, we're going to do that in the next chapter. And the reason why it's dangerous and it is the worst sin are three reasons. There's more than that, but we mentioned just three. The first is, or four, the first is the person who falls into shirk in its major form exits the fold of Islam. The person who falls into shirk in its major form exits the fold of Islam. He becomes a kafir. Of course, if the rules are met and there's no doubts and the likes, but generally speaking, we're talking about generally speaking. Number two, the person who dies upon shirk. The person who dies upon shirk will never be forgiven. The person who dies upon shirk will never be forgiven. As Allah Azza wa Jal, He just says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ. Allah does not forgive that you associate partners with Him. So number two, Allah will never forgive the person who falls into shirk and dies upon it. Number three, that person is خَالِدٌ مُخَلَّدٌ فِي النَّارِ. That person will be in the hellfire eternally. That person will be in the hellfire eternally. That person will be in the hellfire eternally. And number four, all of his good deeds are wiped out when he falls into shirk. If he dies upon shirk, all of his good deeds are wiped out. So, number one, that if a person falls into one of the types of shirk, which is the major shirk, he exits the fold of Islam. Number two, that Allah Azza wa Jalla will never forgive a person that falls into shirk. Number three, they will be in the hellfire eternally. And number four, if they die upon shirk, then all of their good deeds are wiped out. It's nullified, it's void. And that shows you why this sin is the worst of all sins. Of course, notice that I said, if a person dies upon shirk, if a person is alive and they fell into shirk, are they still able to make tawbah? Yes, they are able to make tawbah. Don't we see every single day a person entering to Islam? Like he was upon shirk, he was upon polytheism, he was upon kufr. And they entered into Islam, so they are Muslim now. So it's possible. How about the person that is Muslim, who fell into shirk, let's say Shirk Akbar, and exited Islam, he's not able to come back? He's able to come back. Okay, so we're talking about someone who died upon Shirk. Allah will never forgive him. But the person who fell into Shirk, then he's able to make tawbah as long as he's alive. طيب. So Allah mentions a number of evidences for that. We're not going to mention all of them, but inshallah I'll mention a few. So the first two verses are similar. Allah Azza wa Jal will never forgive a shirk, that someone associates partners with him, and he forgives anything that is less than that to whomsoever he wills. So what does that mean? If a person dies upon alcohol, drinking alcohol, or zina, or any other major sin that we have, and they die upon it, but they never made tawbah. They never made tawbah. Pray 2 rakats. Pray 2 rakats sunnah. They died upon a major sin. Is it guaranteed that Allah Azza wa Jalla will not forgive them if he dies upon a major sin? Let's ask. A person dies, they used to drink alcohol, they used to do zina, they used to listen to music, they used to do many major sins, or one of the major sins, and they died upon it and they never made tawbah, they never sought forgiveness from Allah. Is that person going to be, is it impossible for him to get forgiven, or?
If he's a Muslim, then is that the mercy of Allah? Allah will choose.
Ahsant. Tahta mashi'atillah. So, if as long as that person is a Muslim, that's upon Tawheed, they never fell into Shirk, but they fell into major sins, then they died and they never made tawbah from that sin, they are tahta mashi'atillah, meaning they are under the will of Allah. If Allah wills, He will forgive them. If Allah wills, He will punish them. If Allah forgives them, then it is out of His mercy and His bounty. And if Allah punishes them, then it's out of justice. He fell into major sins and never made tawbah. But you don't know, you can't gamble on that and say, tahta mashi'atillah. No. The only difference is the person that falls into shirk and he dies upon shirk, he's not under the will of Allah. He's not tahta mashi'atillah. He doesn't have the option, maybe Allah will forgive me. No. Falling upon shirk, Allah Azza wa Jalla will never forgive shirk, as He says here. That's what the verse means. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bih. Allah will never forgive that you associate partners with Him, but He forgives anything lesser than that if a person dies upon it, major sins. Then the next verse is the same. So one is in the beginning of Surah Nisa, and the one is a little bit later. طيب, then Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions the next verse, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ. Indeed, those people that say the statement that Allah Azza wa Jal is Jesus, the son of Maryam, Isa ibn Maryam, then they have disbelieved. Here, first of all, we see that Allah declares the Christians that declare Isa and Jesus to be God, Allah declared them to be disbelievers. That's number one. وَقَالَ الْمَسِيحُ يَا بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلِ. And Isa alayhi salam, he said to the children of Israel, worship Allah Azza wa Jal, my Lord and your Lord, for indeed, إِنَّهُ مَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ. And this is the shahid. This is the point that we want from the verse. For indeed, whoever associates partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah has made it haram for him to enter Jannah, and his final abode will be the hellfire. So this is the evidence to show that the person who falls into major shirk, what did we say? What's the third point? Why shirk is the worst sin? Hellfire forever. What's the evidence? Allah Azza wa Jal, He said He made it haram for them to enter into Jannah, and their abode will be the hellfire. What does that mean? If his abode is the hellfire and it's haram for him to go to Jannah, that means he's going to be there forever. So this is the evidence for that third point. That Allah Azza wa Jal made it haram for a person of shirk to enter into Jannah. As for the Muslim that fell into major sins, as we said, and he never made tawbah, then he's tahta mashi'atillah. If Allah wills, He will punish him. If Allah wills, He will forgive him. If Allah punishes him out of His justice for the sin, the major sin that he fell into, that he never made tawbah for, then he will go into the hellfire for a period in accordance to his sin, to purify him from that sin. That could be a year, 100 years, 1,000 years, Allahu A'lam. And even a second in the hellfire is great. And so when his time when he's been purified from that sin, eventually he will enter into Jannah. The Muslim, the person of Tawheed, the person that stayed away from Shirk, but he was deficient in other areas, he fell into major sins, eventually he'll go to the paradise. That's why we have the hadith of the Jahannamiyun, the last man who will be taken out from the hellfire. Person of Tawheed, a Muslim, the last person in the hellfire that will be taken out, and he will be dipped in the river of life, as they call it, just before Jannah, then he will be entered into Jannah. He's the last man, and after that, all of the people of hellfire, the people of kufr and shirk, they will stay there eternally. طيب. So then this continues again and again and again, similar verses on the dangers of shirk. We're not gonna, time doesn't allow to go through every single verse, but inshallah when you get home, read it. Allah Azza wa Jal, He discussed the affair of shirk a lot. Some of the ulama, they mentioned that the whole of the Quran is revolving around Tawheed. Either talking about clarifying what Tawheed is and the opposite of it, Shirk. Or talking about the stories of the people that preceded us from Ad and Thamud and Salih and the nations that came before us, and how they were when they were the people of Tawheed or the people of Shirk. And lastly, what their final abode is and their consequences. This is the reward of the people of Tawheed, Jannah, and this is how Jannah is. And Allah Azza wa Jal describes it in detail. Or this is the reward of the people of Shirk, the people that refused Tawheed, the people that had too much arrogance. This is the hellfire, and this is its description. So the whole of the Quran in essence revolves around Tawheed. So you read these verses and contemplate upon them, and shows you the dangers of Shirk. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to protect us from it. Then he mentions two hadiths which are similar meaning, both from Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu anhu that reported. He mentions that a man came to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him, what are the two binding affairs, two things that will occur? So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he replies, "Man mata la yushriku billahi shay'an dakhala al-jannah." Whoever dies and he never associated partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he will enter Jannah. And the second half, وَمَنْ مَاتَ يُشْرِكُ بِاللَّهِ شَيْئًا دَخَلَ النَّارِ. And whoever dies and they perform shirk with Allah, associate partners with Allah, made dua to other than Allah, called upon other than Allah, supplicated, dhabh, slaughtering, prayed, nadhr. The people that fell into shirk and gave actions of worship to other than Allah, then they will enter into the hellfire. طيب. And the second hadith is the similar meaning. So whoever meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't associate partners with him, he will enter Jannah, and whoever meets him as having associate partners with him will enter into the hellfire. Like, what about the Muslim who never associated any shirk and partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Will he enter the Jannah straight away? Some of them will, but the person that fell into major sins but never fell into shirk, he will go to the hellfire first to be purified from his sins, then eventually he will enter into Jannah. So the mu'minun, the believers, are two types, the people that will enter Jannah. Those that enter Jannah without ever going through the hellfire, and those that enter Jannah after being punished in the hellfire. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us from those that enter the Jannah بغير حساب ولا عذاب, without being taken into account nor being punished. And so the mu'min, whether he's in this category or this category, they both enter into Jannah eventually, either straight away or after being punished. As for the kafir, mushrik, the one that associates partners with Allah, then he will enter into the hellfire and he will never come out from the hellfire. طيب. So let's recap. What's the 4 reasons why shirk is أعظم ذنب, is the greatest sin? One, yeah. Takes them out of the fold of Islam if they fall into the major. Are you in here? He goes into the hellfire eternally, will never come out from it, the person that dies upon shirk. His good deeds, all of it is wiped away. And I think one of the verses here, no, not here, later we'll mention it. Okay, and lastly, and Allah Azza wa Jalla will never forgive the person that dies upon shirk. Allah will never forgive the person that dies upon shirk. طيب, then he says, the next chapter, أقسام الشرك كثيرة. Here he mentions many categories. Some of them enter into others, but he just mentions them so you get a clear idea of shirk in all of the different forms that it can come in. But some of them, as we said, you're going to see, you have this category, you might have a category later, it will come underneath that one. Okay, so there's many categories here just to show how different forms they can come in. طيب, he says, he mentions 14 categories here. Number 1, شرك في الربوبية وذلك كأن يعتقد شخص أن غير الله يخلق أو يرزق أو يحيي أو يميت إلى غير ذلك من صفات الربوبية. Shirk in rububiyah. To have shirk and associate partners in rububiyah, in lordship. We mentioned the 3 categories of Tawheed: Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, and Tawheed al-Asma' al-Sifat. Just like there's Tawheed in all these 3, it's possible that a person falls into shirk in these 3 as well. So the first 3 categories are these. Shirk in Rububiyyah. And what is that? That a person believes that someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create, can give life, can manage the affairs of the worlds, can give death, وهكذا. Those sifat, those attributes that we said that are specific to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that someone gives it to other than Allah. That's shirk in rububiyyah. Like those that believe that, from the kuffar of Quraysh, that believe that some of the asnam, some of the idols would send them down, would bring them rain. Or slaughtering to a person in the grave will bring about a child. Let's say a person, they have been married and they never had children for many years, and so they're told, go to the grave of so-and-so and slaughter an animal for him and he will give you a child. That's shirk. Shirkun fi rububiyyah. وهكذا. And any other example where some of the sifat, any one of the characteristics of rububiyyah that is specific to Allah is given to other than Allah. So we said rububiyyah, what does it mean? Lordship, but like we said the ta'rif, what was the definition that we gave? Have you got your hand up? Yeah.
That someone other than Allah can do things.
Ahsant. We mentioned before, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah has a specific, is more than one definition, but we made a simple definition. One second, you answered already. Give me a chance. Go on.
So you just mentioning as if someone else can create life other than Allah.
That's part of it, that's an example. But we said there's a definition.
Allah's actions.
Ahsant is the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Tawheed is to single out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His actions, from giving life, from giving death, from sending around rain, from giving you children and the likes. And shirk is to associate or to give any of the actions that are specifically to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to other than Allah. Is there anyone that creates other than Allah? No. The human beings and the likes, that He gives it to other than Allah. Or manages the affairs of the dunya, or has the knowledge of the unseen, or has the knowledge of the death of someone, when they're going to pass away, how long they're going to live for. Someone comes to you, a fortune teller, and tells you you're going to live for 60 years, you're going to die on 17th of December in 2040. Kadhab. So to claim the knowledge of that, and the likes of these things that are specific to Allah is shirk fi rububiyyah. Shirk in rububiyyah. So that's singling Allah Azza wa Jal in His actions. And there's people that believe that today. Don't think that this is some fantasy stories I'm telling you and these examples are maybe too extreme. Alhamdulillah, maybe we don't have it in our communities, but there are people in the world that believe that there are 12 imams, like the extreme Rafida, Shia, that have exited, that are not in the fold of Islam. The Rafida, Shia, 2 types. The extreme ones, Rafida, the 12ers, they believe that their 12 imams have the knowledge of the unseen and that they control the affairs of the world from their graves. They believe that. So that's shirk fi rububiyyah. And there's others that believe if you have any problem, whether you can't have a child, or you can't do this, or you can't get that, you want rizq, you want money, you want this, you want that, instead of telling you, make dua to Allah, they will tell you, go to the grave. Everything, go to the grave. Make sure when you go to the grave, just leave some money, Who's collecting that money? After everyone leaves, they start collecting the money from the people, bil batil, fil batil, in falsehood. So all of that is shirk in rububiyyah. Shirk in rububiyyah. The next example is shirk fil uluhiyya. Shirkun fil uluhiyya. And we said uluhiyya means, what's the definition of uluhiyya? Ahsant, singling Allah Azza wa Jal with your actions, with our actions as servants, as the ibad. That we make all our actions only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the acts of worship that He deserves, from praying, from fasting, from oath, from slaughtering, from making dua, from hub, from having love that is ibadah, from having fear that is ibadah. And we're going to mention those examples later today. And so if you give any of that, any right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our actions as slaves, that you give it to other than Allah, then that is shirk. So dua is from the highest levels of acts of worship. Dua. And it's only for Allah. So if I start making dua to other than Allah, then that is shirkun fil uluhiyya. There's someone in the grave, or someone that they claim to be from the awliya or the likes, they say, make dua to him. Ya Khalid. They raise their hand and they say, Ya Khalid, oh Khalid, answer my dua, I have this problem, alleviate from me, kada. But they don't say it just like that, because that would be too clear to everyone. So they will say, they will bring another doubt to make you do that. They will say, look, this guy Khalid, this righteous wali that he's in his grave, he's more righteous than you. He's closer to Allah than you. You're a sinner. So you make dua to Khalid, and Khalid is going to make dua to Allah for you. Right? That's how they get some people. And so what happens is he starts making dua to Khalid, giving actions that are from uluhiyya, that is specific to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They start giving it to this person called Khalid, with the illusion that he's going to go and speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I mention evidences later, how that is false as well. And this is how the same shirk that the kuffar of Quraysh and the people of the past used to fall into. They said, we're not worshipping them, we're just using them as intercessors. Those gods, those idols, those things, those angels, or whatever they're worshipping, are closer to Allah. So we're making dua to them so they can make dua to Allah. And that is ayn al-shirk. And this is shirkun fi al-uluhiyya. The next one is shirkun fi al-asma' wal-sifat, is shirk in the names and attributes of Allah. And that is that you give وذلك كأن يصف شخص بعض خلق الله ببعض الصفات الخاصة بالله تعالى كعلم الغيب مثلا إلى غير ذلك من صفات ربنا سبحانه وتعالى الخاصة به. That you give some of the descriptions that are specific to Allah, the attributes that are specific to Allah, that you give it to other than Allah. This is shirkun fil asma' sifat. That you claim that a creation has the knowledge of the unseen, he says, for example, or that he is all-seeing. That you know that Khalid guy in his grave, even though he's buried in Malaysia or he's buried in Morocco, he can see you from his grave. And that is something specific to Allah. Or the likes. So having all knowledge, all hearing, all seeing, able to affect you from far away lands. And to give him that as an attribute, that is shirkun fil asma' sifat. And you can see that's also shirkun in rububiyyah as well, because you're claiming that he has knowledge of the unseen. So we said you can enter into one another. Then he mentions the fourth category. And here he mentions number 4 and number 5. Shirkun akbar and shirkun asghar. Major shirk and minor shirk. Major shirk is any action هو شرك الاعتقاد وهو مخرج من الملة. He says here is the shirk of belief, and it takes a person out of the fold of Islam, but it's more broad than that. Shirk akbar, major shirk, is any action that is shirk, that is associating partners with Allah, that takes you out of the fold of Islam. That takes you out the fold of Islam. Minor shirk is any shirk, anything that's described as associating partners with Allah, a type of associating partners with Allah, but it doesn't reach the level of major shirk, and it doesn't take you out of the fold of Islam. So for example, ar-riya, showing off. Showing off, you're showing off because somebody else is looking at you. But it doesn't reach the level because you're praying to Allah, but then you beautify it or you do something with it to show off to other than Allah. It's shirk, but it's shirkun asghar. It doesn't take a person out the fold of Islam. It's a major sin. They need to make tawbah, but they're still Muslim. So major shirk is that which is shirk that takes a person out of the fold of Islam. And shirk asghar, minor shirk, is that which doesn't take a person out of the fold of Islam, but they need to make tawbah from it. They need to make tawbah and repentance from it. And in these two categories, the previous examples can enter into one of these two. Then we have the next one, which is shirkun khafi, which is the hidden shirk. وهو أن يعمل الرجل لمكان الرجل وهو أصغر وأكبر ومنه الرياء وهو كما علمت غير مخرج من الملة ولكن تجب التوبة منه والأكبر مخرج من الملة. Then we have hidden shirk. And he says here, it is that a person performs an action because of somebody else or because of the position and station of someone else. And this is showing off. And so this is hidden shirk. It's minor shirk as well. And this hidden shirk can also be, he says, major. So the minor, like showing off, doesn't take a person out of the fold of Islam, but it's obligatory upon him to make tawbah. وَالْأَكْبَرُ مُخْرِجٌ مِنَ الْمِلَّةِ. And if it's a major act of shirk, and it's hidden, is in the heart or the likes, then it can take a person out of the fold of Islam. The next category mentioned is shirkun i'tiqadiyun. The shirk which is in a person's creed. وهو أن يعتقد إنسان أن غير الله يخلق أو يرزق أو يحيي إلى آخره. The shirk which is in a person's i'tiqad, in a person's heart, their belief, is that a person believes that anyone other than Allah can create, can give life, can give death, knows the knowledge of the unseen, and the likes of these affairs. And this is shirkun akbar, and it takes a person out of the fold of Islam. May Allah Azza wa Jal protect us from that. So you can see again some of these examples, they go inside and interlace. So that's shirk in the creed. The next one is shirkun amali, shirk in a person's actions. وهو كل عمل حكم عليه الشرع الإسلامي بالشرك كالذبح لغير الله والنذر لغير الله إلى غير ذلك وهو أكبر وأصغر. Shirk in a person's action is any action that you perform that is shirk, whether it's major or minor. It can be major or it can be minor. And so a physical thing that you do that is shirk, like physically slaughtering to other than Allah, physically making sujood to or ruku' to other than Allah, making an oath to other than Allah, and the likes of these things. So some of these examples are major shirk, they take a person out of the fold of Islam. Some of these examples are minor shirk. So here we see that shirk can be in a person's i'tiqad, in a person's belief. It can be in a person's actions. What's the only thing that's missing? Speech. أحسنت كلكم. شرك لفظي.
So if a person basically does an action, let's say if you work, you're not working for Allah, that the niyyah is not correct, is that shirk as well? If you're not working for Allah.
Work, what do you mean work? Like normal work?
Yeah, normal work.
No, that's not ibadah. And it only becomes ibadah if you have intention, for example, to feed your, to be self-sufficient or to feed your wife and children. Then it becomes an act of worship and you get the reward because the intention that you're feeding your family. But in itself, it's not an act of worship by itself. Okay? So that doesn't enter into it. We're talking about, we said what is ibadah? Last week we said, he wasn't here last week. Last week we mentioned the ta'rif, the definition of ibadah. What's the definition of ibadah?
Comprehensive word, everything that Allah loves.
No memorized, yeah? Go on, it's better than nothing.
Sorry?
Go on, read. Comprehensive word.
Everything that Allah loves and is pleased with inwardly and outwardly.
Ahsant. A comprehensive word for everything that Allah Azza wa Jalla loves, from speech and actions, adda. From speech and actions, inwardly and outwardly. You're going to say the Arabic. What's the Arabic? Ahsant. So memorize that. That definition, I want you guys to all memorize it. It's in the book. Is اسم جامع لكل ما يحبه الله ويرضاه من الأقوال والأعمال الظاهرة والباطنة. Is a comprehensive word that comes underneath it what? Everything Allah Azza wa Jalla loves and He's pleased with from the actions, from the statements, inwardly and outwardly. That's what an act of worship is. And so this act of worship that we know the definition of, everything else comes under that from there. So we mentioned shirkun i'tiqadi, shirk in the person's creed, shirk in a person's actions, and then the next one is shirk al-lafzi, shirk in a person's statement. وَهُوَ كُلُّ لَفْظٍ حَكَمَ عَلَيْهِ الشَّرْعُ بِالشِّرْكِ. So it's every statement that the Sharia has judged to be an act of shirk. whoever says this, then this is a shirk. For example, swearing by other than Allah, making an oath by other than Allah, such as the statements, نعم توكلت على الله وعليك, I put my trust in Allah and you. This is shirk in statement. Or ما شاء الله وشئت, whatever Allah wills and you will, and you will. That's shirk in statement. ولولا الله وفلان, if it was not for so and so, if it was not for Allah and you, then the thieves wouldn't have come. If it was not for Allah and you, this wouldn't have taken place. That's shirk. That you put Allah on par with this other thing that you mention in the same sentence that you say and. So what's the Tawheed to say? We're going to learn it later, but I'll just mention it quickly. In these types of statements, what's the correct thing to say? It's better to either say lawla Allah, if it was not for Allah alone, or you say if it was not for Allah and then, that you add then, and then you. But if you say if it was not for Allah and you, meaning you and Allah were the reason and you're on the same level, that's shirk fil lafz, in the statement. So the Sharia has to even protect any shirk coming even in a person's statement. It says that you have to say, if it was not for Allah, and then, meaning the person, whatever a person is after is underneath Allah. Allah Azza wa Jalla is first, don't put in the same sentence. And then. Is that clear? Ma sha Allah. Thumma. Then what you will. Lawla Allah. If it was not for Allah, then the security camera or whatever we had. Is that clear? And that is Janab al-Tawheed fil alfaz, protecting Tawheed from the angle of statements. And this again goes into major and minor. Some can be major, some can be minor. So the statements that we said are minor. Likewise, swearing by other than Allah, that a person says, I swear by my mum, or they swear by their dead dog's granddad's grave, like some people do for fun. Or I swear down, which has no meaning, but it's shirk. All of it is shirk, swearing down, swearing up, swearing on my whiskies, or whatever they say, anything that they say. All of that is shirk. All of that is shirk, asghar, minor shirk. Person is only allowed to swear by Allah, His names and His attributes. Wallahi, wa billahi, wa tallahi, by Ar-Rahman, by the Lord of the Kaaba, by the one who controls all of the affairs, by the one who has knowledge of the unseen, that you swear by Allah, either by His name or by His attributes. As for Allah Azza wa Jal, then He is allowed to swear with whatever He wills from His creation. And sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, wal asr, He swears by time, wal duha, the specific time of the day, wal fajr, the early part of the day. Allah Azza wa Jal, He swears by them, by the creation, as He pleases. Can we swear by the Quran? So if a person is swearing by the Quran, the speech of Allah, then that is fine. Why? Because the speech of Allah is an attribute of Him. But if a person is swearing by the mushaf, the physical mushaf, the cover, and not the Quran, then that is not allowed. Okay, but if a person intends that they mean the speech of Allah, that is either written or memorized, the Quran is the speech of Allah in whatever form it comes in, then that is fine. طيب, so that's alfaz. The next shirk is shirk al-tashri', shirk in legislation. وهو أن ينبذ الإنسان الكتاب والسنة أو بعض أحكامهما ويأخذ بآراء الرجال وقوانين البشر. قال الله تعالى أم لهم شركاء شرعوا لهم من الدين ما لم يأذن به الله. And here the shirk is that a person throws the Quran and the Sunnah or some of its rulings, and then he takes by the opinions of men and the laws of mankind, then this is a shirk of legislation. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, أَمْ لَهُمْ شُرَكَاء, do they have partners that legislated for them that which Allah Azza wa Jal did not give permission for? Do they have partners that legislate for them, this is halal, this is haram, and the likes? So this is a type of shirk. And again, it can go into major shirk or minor shirk. And so major shirk is, two categories is, the first is that a person, he sees that these laws, man-made laws, that they are better or the same as the Sharia of Allah. If a person sees that this man-made law is the same or better than the law of Allah Azza wa Jal, then that is shirkun akbar. That's major shirk that takes a person out of the fold of Islam. But if a person believes that these qawaneen, these man-made laws, they are not better than the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows that the law of Allah and the Sharia of Allah is better. He knows the falsehood of these man-made laws and their contradictions. But because of some desires or weakness, or he won't get in power unless he does what they believe in, or whatever other reason, due to weakness, then this is minor shirk and it doesn't take a person out of the fold of Islam. And this is the tafsir that Ibn Abbas gave and other than them from the scholars when they mentioned the verses that talk with regards to this affair. And so it's not everyone that judges by other than Allah is kuffar. All of them are kuffar. No, there's tafsil, there's detail. That person is a Muslim and he holds that these man-made laws are falsehood and he prefers the Sharia because of weakness or ghalaba, he's overpowered, or weak iman, that he chooses these man-made laws even though he knows the Sharia is better and these man-made laws are false, and he's still a Muslim, but he's fallen into major sin. As for a person that believes that these man-made laws are good, they're the same, they're better than the Sharia of Allah, then that person is a kafir. Is that clear? So again, just like the other categories, this can be major or minor. The next one is shirk al-mahabbah. There's going to be a separate chapter for it. Shirk in a person's love. And that is a person loves Allah other than Allah just like he loves Allah or more. And we're going to mention a whole chapter for that soon. The next one is shirk al-khawfi wal-khashya. The shirk in a person's fear and awe. And he's going to mention a chapter for that as well. Shirk al-qasdi wal-irada. That a person has shirk in their intention and their, if you like, motivation. وهو أن يريد الإنسان بعمله غير الله ويقصد به غير وجه الله فهذا شرك القصد والإرادة. That a person, what does it mean? That a person, he wants with his actions other than Allah. He wants with his actions other than Allah. So he performs a righteous deed, not because he's doing it for the sake of Allah, but he wants it so he can get something from the dunya. Or the likes. طيب, shirk al-ta'a, and the last one is number 14, is the shirk of obedience. Shirk of obedience. So shirk can occur in obedience as well. And so the example of that is, or the definition of it is, وهو أن يطيع العبد شخصا في تحليل حرام أو تحريم حلال. قال الله تعالى اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. He says that a person obeys somebody in making halal that which is haram, or making haram that which is halal. Allah made something halal. Someone comes and they say, no, this thing is haram. And that you obey them in that. You don't obey them because they forced you or because you're under threat or you fear for your life. No. If a person was forced to, then they're not taken into account. But we're talking about that a person is not forced to, but he obeys somebody in this affair of making that which is halal haram, or the opposite, that which is haram halal, and you obey them in that, then that is shirk in obeying, fi ta'a. And the example of that hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions how some of the Christians, they took their leaders and their let's say priests or the likes as deities besides Allah. So Adi ibn Hatim, if I'm not mistaken, Adi ibn Hatim from the Sahaba, he said, he used to be Christian, he said they did not take them as deities, they don't worship those men. Brother, did you pray 2 rak'ahs? Did you take them as deity? We did not take them as, we don't worship them, he said. So Allah said, do they not make that which is halal haram, or that which is haram halal, and you guys obey them in that? He said, yes. He goes, that is your worship of them. That is your worship of them. So this hadith clearly shows this category of shirk al-ta'a, and that is anybody. Someone tells you or make something that is haram halal for you or halal haram for you, and you obey them in that without being forced, then that is shirk al-ta'a. We said there's a principle we have in Islam, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. There is no obedience to any person, to anyone from the human beings, if it involves disobedience to Allah. Even to those people that you have to obey. If they command you something that is in disobedience to Allah, then you don't have to listen. So we give you 3 examples. There are 6 obediences in Islam where a person has to obey someone else as mentioned in the Sharia. We just mentioned 3. The first is the ruler, the Muslim ruler, whether he is righteous or he is sinful. We have to obey him. We have to listen and obey him in those things that are good. And even if it's not an act of worship, but he tells you something that's normal and he commands you with it, then you have to obey. Like, let's say the traffic lights in a Muslim country, and they tell you traffic lights have to stop at green. This is the law of the land that we set about for the safety in cars and kada. You have to obey. And you obeying that rule is obeying the ruler. طيب. That ruler tells you to do something that's haram. He tells you, go grab me alcohol. Go get me this. Go make dua to other than Allah. Do you have to obey him? No. Because that involves disobedience to Allah. And you're not allowed to obey anyone if it involves disobedience to Allah. So you say, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. Sorry, I can't obey you. But because he told you to do the sin, do you say, khalas, I take back my allegiance, you're not my ruler anymore, and I'm going to revolt against you, and I'm going to call against you? La. You don't obey him in that sin, in that command. But he's still the Muslim ruler. You still listen and obey in everything else that is good. Is that clear? Some people, they confuse between the two. They don't understand that there is a ta'a wajiba, there's an obligatory obedience to the ruler in that which is good. That's one thing. And not listening to him in those things that are haram. But at the same time, not taking away your pledge of allegiance from him. He's still your Muslim ruler. You still have to listen and obey in everything else apart from that haram thing he commanded you with. Is that clear? So let's say there's a Muslim country, any Muslim country, and for argument's sake, they have, I don't know, music concerts, and let's say they do it in an area, and they say, everyone in the area, you have to join us in this festival, this music concert. You say to them, Jazakallah khair. That is haram. Allah made that haram. I cannot obey you in that. And that doesn't mean that you say, khalas, I'm not obeying him in that, meaning he's not my Muslim ruler anymore. We need another Muslim ruler. We need to get rid of him. Some people, they don't understand to differentiate between the two affairs. You don't obey anyone. And that's from them is the ruler in the disobedience of Allah, but you still have to keep your pledge of allegiance. And that's going to make it clear in the next example. The next person that you have to obey is your parents. You have to obey your parents. Okay, in that which is good. But if they tell you to do something that is haram, let's say a Muslim parent is sinful and they tell you, go and grab me cigarettes. Haram. Go grab me alcohol. Then you say, Jazakallah khair, I'm not allowed to listen to you in that which has disobedience to Allah. Cigarettes is haram, smoking is haram, alcohol is haram, music is haram. I'm not allowed to help you in those affairs. I can't listen to you in that. But does that mean that, khalas, you're not my parent anymore? I'm going to, disown you and madriyash, I'm going to leave the house because you told me to do something haram. I'm going to cut you off. Does that mean that? No, it doesn't necessitate that. You don't listen to them in that thing that is haram, and they're still your parents. You still listen to them in everything else. If straight away they tell you, khalas, go get me a cup of tea now. Khalas, you go grab a cup of tea. It's wajib upon you. And obeying them in that is from the obedience of Allah. So, as we said here, again, does it contradict that you don't listen to them in haram, but you still have to listen to them everything else? Is there contradiction? No, there's no contradiction. Just like for the ruler, and likewise for the parents. And the same for the wife obeying the husband. That's from the times when in Islam where obedience has to occur. That a woman obeys her husband. But now her husband tells her to do something that is haram. That, for example, that the husband says to go to a wedding that is mixed. There's men and women there. And he says, come, let's go together. We're going to this wedding that's mixed. And there's men and women there. And you're not wearing hijab and you wear makeup and everything else. This is haram, right? The wife has the right to refuse. Why? Because obeying him in that involves what? Disobedience to Allah. And she has to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. No creation, doesn't matter what their level is, then you're not allowed to obey them in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So she refuses, but she listens in everything else that is good. Is that clear?
Say a wife wants to do Umrah, but the husband's not letting them, but they have a mahram like their son who can take them. Can she go without the husband?
No, she has to obey the husband. And that's the things that are normal. So if he prefers that she stays, she has to stay.
You know, if the husband takes like one opinion, that topic that has difference of opinion, does the wife then have to take his opinion?
Yes, this is from the points that the ulama mentioned. If there's a fiqh mas'ala and there's a difference of opinion, okay? Some ulama say this, some ulama say this. It's a fiqh, it's got scope for difference, tolerance for that. But he holds this opinion and he's acting upon that in the house, then it's upon her to follow that as well, to act upon that. That's the same as in a Muslim country. If there's a difference of opinion and there's scope, some ulama say this, some ulama says that, but the ruler of the land takes the opinion in the fiqh mas'ala of this, and this is the one that they judge by in their day-to-day life, then you have to follow that. Is that clear? Okay. So that's a very important principle. لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. No obedience to creation when it involves disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب, the next chapter is أقسام الخوف. Now he's going to mention the 4 categories of fear. Fear has 4 categories. He says خوف عبادة وهو الخوف من الله وحده لا شريك له وهذا نوع عبادة قلبية تعبدنا الله بها قال الله تعالى ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان وقال تعالى وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى وقال تعالى واصفا عباده الملائكة يخافون ربهم من فوقهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون وقال تعالى الذين يبلغون رسالات الله ويخشونه ولا يخشون أحدا إلا الله وكفى بالله حسيبا. So the first category is shirk wa ibadah, that a person falls into shirk in worship, and that is that a person fears the shirk that is Tawheed is that a person fears Allah Azza wa Jal alone in that which is worship. And shirk in ibadah is that a person what did we say? Shirk ibadah, right? Yeah, khalas. Let's just stick to that. Shirk ibadah is that a person fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without any partners. And this fear is ibadatun qalbiyah, is an act of worship that's in a person's heart, that you worship Allah by way of. So you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you stay away from the muharramat. You fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you stay away from all the things that Allah Azza wa Jal has told you to stay away from the things that are haram, and you fear the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you stay away from anything that will lead you to the punishment of Allah. طيب. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, whoever fears the station of his Lord, then he has 2 jannatan, 2 gardens. وقال تعالى, whoever fears the station of their Lord, وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and he forbids his own soul from following the desires, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, then the paradise will be his abode. And Allah Azza wa Jal, He describes His servants from the malaika, يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُم مِّن فَوْقِهِمْ, they fear their Lord who is above them, or from above them. وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ, and they do that which they are commanded with. وقال تعالى, similar verse again. So this is shirk ibadah. Khawfu ibadah. This is khawfu ibadah. This is the fear that is an act of worship. The next category is the opposite of this. The next category is the opposite of this, which is shirkul khawf. That a person, this action of fear that is supposed to be for Allah alone, that is an act of worship, that you give it to other than Allah. So that you fear other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the jinn or the dead or the likes, that they will harm you. So you fear them. So you have fear that this dead person in his grave, because you disobeyed him, or you didn't slaughter him, or you didn't give him the money that they ask you of monthly, that somehow he's going to affect you from his grave, and maybe a lightning struck is going to come down on you, or maybe the earth is going to swallow you because that wali is angry with you. This fear is shirk. This is the fear you're supposed to have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And the same for the jinn. The jinn is a creation that we believe in that exists just like the human beings. There's good from amongst them and there's bad from amongst them. We don't give them any extra attention where you fear them. Every time you go, I'm scared of the jinn, I'm scared of the jinn, or maybe they're going to harm me, maybe this is going to happen, maybe that. Just like you don't worry about another human being, day-to-day life, khalas, don't worry about a jinn, he's just like you, he's got his own life. As long as you're upright upon the religion and you take the means from the adhkar, from reading the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before you go to the toilet, when you come out of the toilet, when you leave your house and the likes, it's nothing to fear. Okay? So if a person goes excessive in this where they fear the harm of the jinn, that the jinn will do something to him, or will ruin his livelihood, or will ruin something that he has, then this is khawf that he's only supposed to have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب. The next one is, so the first is, as we said, is khawf, that is an act of worship that is for Allah Azza wa Jal alone. The second is the opposite, is that you give that khawf which is specific to Allah to other than Allah, like the jinn or the dead. The third category is خوف المعصية وهو أن يخاف العبد من إنسان أو أناس فيترك واجبا أو يرتكب محرما خوفا منهم ولم يصل إلى حد الإكراه فهذا الخوف معصية قال الله تعالى إنما ذلكم الشيطان يخوف أولياءه فلا تخافوهم وخافون إن كنتم مؤمنين. This khawf is that a person, he fears somebody else or a bunch of people. And this fear of them is not a fear that leads to, they've got a gun over your head. That's natural fear, as it's going to come. Or they're threatening you with, a tiger or something, or a pit bull. They're going to let him loose if you don't drop all your money right now, or you stop praying. That's something that is waqi', you're forced. And we said, anything that you're forced to do or to leave, Allah doesn't take you to account for. But here we're talking about something that doesn't reach that level of being forced. So let's say peer pressure. A person's in school, there's a big bully. Okay? He hasn't forced you to do anything. He hasn't even come near you, but he's over there. He comes, you don't pray salah, because you fear if you go pray salah, he's going to, maybe that can enter being forced. Like Al-Muhim, you don't leave something that is wajib or fall into something that is haram because you fear somebody else. Okay? Because you fear somebody else. As long as that fear doesn't reach what? Being forced. So let's say, this is a good example. You fear that your employee will kick you out if you pray your dhuhr and asr, especially winter times coming in, dhuhr, asr, maghrib in one shift. You fear if you pray all three, dhuhr, asr and maghrib, that you fear he might kick you out the work or you lose your job. So what do? You don't pray at all. That is shirk ma'asiyah. That's a sin. You fall into sin because of this person. Or you fell into some haram. Let's say the ruler is there and he's not forcing anyone to do anything and he's not known to punish people or the likes. But because you're in the gathering of the king or the royal people and they're all drinking alcohol, you feel like you're going to be the odd one out if you don't drink alcohol. So you drink alcohol just because everyone else is drinking it. Fearing something of maybe misfortune or them talking about you. This fear, and you're not being punished, led him to drinking the alcohol. So this is fear, ma'asiyah. Khawfu ma'asiyah. Is that clear? So khawfu ma'asiyah is any fear that doesn't or reach the level of being forced, that makes you fall into something that's haram or to leave something that is obligatory. The next one is, so here Allah Azza wa Jal, he mentions many verses from Allah Azza wa Jal where he says, فَلَا تَخْشَوْهُمْ وَخْشَوْنِي, do not fear them, fear me, in 3 places in the Quran in similar verses. The next category is al-khawf al-tabi'i, the natural fear. This is the 4th category. So the first category was, what's the first category? fear of worship. What's the next one? Shirk in fear. So the opposite of ibadah. Then the next one. What's it called? Khawf ma'siyah. That the fear that leads you to disobedience or sin. And doesn't reach the level of being forced. And the fourth one is natural fear. And so that is a person he fears whether it's an enemy, whether it's wild animals, a snake, a lion, or the likes. This is normal, natural fear, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? There's nothing wrong with that. That there's an opposing army, you're in the war, you're in the battlefield, the war's about to begin, and you see the enemy army, that you have a little bit of fear. The fear doesn't lead you to leave the battlefield or think that they're going to, do some voodoo jinn and send some voodoo jinn on you and you're scared of. No. It's just the natural fear of, now look, there's going to be bloodshed happening. I could possibly die, I could not possibly die. That natural fear, that's fine, that's normal. Musa alayhi salam, when he went to Fir'aun, when he was commanded to go to Fir'aun, he says, قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُكَذِّبُونَ. Oh my Lord, I fear that they will reject me or they will belie me. And another place, Musa alayhi salam, he says, قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي قَتَلْتُ مِنْهُمْ نَفْسًا فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. Indeed, I killed a man from amongst them from before he became a prophet. So if I go back to them, I fear that they will kill me. So this is natural fear, that they will kill him. And likewise, when he after they made the illusion of their sticks going into snakes, they made the illusion, the magic, some fear came to him. And so Allah Azza wa Jal kept him steadfast, and he threw his stick, which became into a snake and ate their snakes. So all of these places it mentions fear. Likewise, when Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to him the first time, he had fear as well. So these are all in the story of Musa. All of that is natural fear. Likewise, in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when the guests came to him and he brought to them some food and he wanted to give it to them, or he brought it closer to them, and he saw that they're not eating. These guests that came to him that are from outside, that he's never seen before. He got for them an animal, slaughtered for them, he brought it close to them, فَقَرَّبَهُ إِلَيْهِمْ قَالَ أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ. Will you not eat? فَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً. When they were not eating, he became fearful of them. Why they're not eating? That's natural fear. Is that clear? And obviously they said we are from the angels and kada, we've been sent to go to the people of Lut ila akhir, until the rest of the story. So this is natural fear and it's completely fine. Likewise, you can add to that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when they were going to the migration from Mecca to Medina, and they went into the cave to hide. And so they were hiding at a place in the cave, and the kuffar of Quraysh were looking for them, trying to kill the Prophet ﷺ. And they were literally on top of them. And so Abu Bakr was fearful and he said, if they look down, they will see us, O Messenger of Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he is mentioned in the verse, وَثَانِيَ اثْنَيْنِ إِذْ هُمَا فِي الْغَارِ إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. When the Prophet ﷺ said to his companion, لَا تَحْزَنْ, do not fear, Allah Azza wa Jalla is with us. And so that was a natural fear. All of these examples are natural fear, and this is completely permissible, and there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't enter into shirk, and it doesn't enter into worship. Is that clear? So those are the four categories. So the one that Allah Azza wa Jalla requires from us, that's an act of worship, is that we fear Him alone. وَحْدَهُ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. That He's the only one that can, give us punishment in the dunya, from the different types of punishment. If a person is upon sins, like we mentioned, if a person is upon sin, in a hal of sin, and Allah is giving him blessings on top of blessings, what did we call that? We mentioned that in one of the first lessons. Istidraj, ahsant. Istidraj. That a person is upon sin, that a person fears that Allah Azza wa Jal, that He does istidraj with him. What's istidraj? That you are in a state of sin. Night and day you're sinning. But Allah is giving you. Rizq, wealth, health, children, everything that everyone wants, you get it with no struggle. And you don't give gratitude to it. And you continue sinning. Don't think that this is something good. it's called istidraj, which is Allah Azza wa Jal will basically, let's just say in English terms, you know, what's the English term? They say, give him a rope, then let him go far, then let him hang himself with the same rope. Yani Allah Azza wa Jal gives you blessings, you're upon sin, and in the end, because of that sin and the blessings that you fall into more sin. When you become heedless, one time Allah Azza wa Jal will punish you. Either take your life in that state, or will give you a punishment in the dunya, or the likes. So fearing istidraj is something that you're supposed to have of Allah Azza wa Jal alone, and the likes. And the opposite, which is shirk, that you do not fear the dead, that they can affect you, that they can harm you, or the jinn, or the likes. And then the third category, which is shirk ma'asiyah, to not fear anyone to the extent that they make you fall into haram or leave alone some obligation. And this, as long as it doesn't reach the level of being forced. And lastly, the fear which is natural. Then we go to the next chapter, which is the same 4 categories, but it's talking on the topic of mahabbah, love. So love again goes into the same categories of fear, 4 categories. So the first category is mahabbatu ibadah, the mahabba, the love which is an act of worship, وَهِيَ حُبُّ اللَّهِ وَحُبُّ مَنْ يُحِبُّهُ اللَّهِ, which is to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to love those and the things Allah Azza wa Jalla loves. قال الله تعالى وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ, and those that believe, they are more fierce and more strong in their love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you love everything Allah Azza wa Jal commands with and makes him pleased, and you love those that Allah Azza wa Jal loves, the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. This is love that is ibadah. The second category is mahabbatun shirkiyah, the love which is shirk. And that is a person loves someone or something other than Allah the same way they love Allah, or that they love that thing more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they love somebody or someone or something other than Allah, just like they love Allah, or they love that thing more than they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is shirkun, this is shirk in a person's mahabbah. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. And from the people are those that take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as rivals, as partners. يُحِبُّونَهُمْ, they love them. كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ, just like they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is shirk in mahabbah. The next category is mahabbatun ma'siyah, the love that leads to disobedience. So the same as the khawf, the fear, that you love someone to the extent that it makes you leave something which is obligatory upon you, or to fall into something that is haram. Like, for example, that a person loves their parents so much that it causes them to buy them alcohol or cigarettes or the likes. The thing that we told you, which is haram, right? You're not allowed to do. Or you drink it with them. Because of your love for your parents, you did this. This is haram. Likewise, what can enter into this is loving the sins itself, loving sins, loving music, loving riba, loving the people of sins, the people of innovation, the people of desires, and the likes of affairs that is in opposition to the Sharia. As long as obviously a person doesn't hold that this sin is permissible. As long as he doesn't hold that alcohol is halal. Because that's another level, that's kufr. But a person loves alcohol, he loves to drink it, and he will post it on his social media, and he will advertise it, and he's a promoter of it. But he knows that it's haram. So that is ma'siyah. As for if he holds that the alcohol is halal for him and is permissible and there's nothing wrong with it, then this is kufr. This takes a person out of the fold of Islam. The last category is what? Which category? Natural love. It's a natural love that a person has for their children, for their parents, for their spouses, for wealth. The natural love that a person has for wealth and the likes of these affairs that are permissible. This is natural love. There's nothing wrong with that. It's permissible. But it's befitting in this natural love that it doesn't go past its boundaries. So if it goes past its boundaries and it makes you fall into haram and makes you leave off obligation, then it enters into which category? It goes into shirk in mahabbah. No, not shirk. Ma'siyah. It goes into disobedience, the third category. Because now you love them so much, you've gone beyond the levels that you're allowed to have of permissible. It actually made you leave off the 5 daily prayers. Now it's part of the third category. Or it made you fall into haram, part of the third category. And if it goes even further than that, it goes even more from beyond the boundaries. That a person, he loves this thing more than he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he can enter into the second category, shirk in mahabbah. Is that clear? So the natural permissible things, love of family, children and the likes, they shouldn't distract you from your ibadah, from your worship. Okay, I love my children and I take them to school. But because I take them on the school run and whatnot, I can't really pray Fajr, I can't pray Fajr, so, I just pray Fajr after the school run, I come back like 9 o'clock and then I pray my Fajr then. That is haram. That is haram. Okay? That goes into the third category. If a person says, you know what, I love my children so much, dedicating my whole life to them, and you know what, I'm not even going to stop. I'm going to stop praying. I don't pray anymore to Allah. Completely. Then that can enter into a second category of shirk, and it takes a person out of the fold. It can take a person out of the fold of Islam. Is that clear? As-salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so we've got a little bit left. We'll do this last chapter, inshallah. تحريم الدعاء غير الله. So those are 4 categories. Don't confuse the 4. Some people, they confuse natural fear for fear that is worship, or natural love for shirk in love and the likes. Don't confuse, each of the 4 with their examples. فَاطْبِدْهَا, then memorize it and learn it properly so you don't get confused. Later, if you know these 4 categories, and later you have a scenario where you maybe fell into one of these 4, or a situation occurred, you know that there's these 4 categories, so which one does it go into? Okay, this is something Allah wants from me, and Allah loves. Okay, this is ibadah, so I need to give it to Allah only. Alright, this thing, shirk, I need to stay away from it. This thing, if it makes me leave the salah time, whether it's work, whether it's school, wherever it is, then this is ma'siyah, whether it's in fear or love. And this is the natural. There's nothing wrong if someone naturally fears a cat. Don't say, akhi, you need to check your Tawheed, bro. How can you be scared of a cat? La, it's natural fear. Let him be scared. Everyone's scared of something different. Okay? It's natural fear. There's nothing wrong with that. وهكذا. Natural love as well. طيب. So the next chapter is تحريم الدعاء غير الله. The impermissibility of making dua to other than Allah. And this is one of the most important chapters, one of the most important actions of worship. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, الدعاء هو العبادة. Supplication, dua, it is ibadah, meaning it's the pinnacle of it, it's the head of it. And it's the clearest form, if you like. And so here, he mentions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 different places in the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jalla, he talks about dua and how it's connected to Tawheed and falling to shirk to whoever gives it to other than Allah. And then he mentions 2 ahadith. That's just a few examples, 17 examples in the Quran of the importance of dua, and there are many other places. This is from the clearest form of worship. And so, giving it, you only make supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you do not supplicate to anyone besides Him. And making dua to other than Allah is shirk in its clearest form. Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions many verses. We're just going to mention a few, and then you can read the rest inshallah yourself. قال الله تعالى إن يدعو. Actually, we read all of it. لا بأس. Inshallah, لا بأس. It's khair in hearing the verses on Tawheed, dua. Madam is so important. Five minutes. قال الله تعالى إن يدعون من دونه إلا إناثا وإن يدعون إلا شيطانا مريدا لعنه الله وقال لأتخذن من عبادك نصيبا مفروضا وقال تعالى قل أندعو من دون الله ما لا ينفعنا ولا يضرنا ونرد على أعقابنا بعد إذ هدانا الله كالذي استهوته الشياطين في الأرض حيران له أصحاب يدعونه إلى الهدى ائتنا قل إن هدى الله هو الهدى وأمرنا لنسلم لرب العالمين وقال تعالى إن الذين تدعون من دون الله عباد أمثالكم فادعوهم فليستجيبوا لكم إن كنتم صادقين. I'll just translate small ones. Here Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, indeed those that call upon other than Allah, anything that they call upon other than Allah, then they are ibadun amthalukum. They are slaves just like you. فَادْعُوهُمْ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكُمْ. Then call upon them and let's see if they accept your dua in kuntum sadiqin, if you are truthful. وقال تعالى والذين تدعون من دونه لا يستطيعون نصركم ولا أنفسهم ينصرون. Those that you call upon besides Him, besides Allah, they are not able to aid you. ولا أنفسهم, nor can they aid themselves. So if a person in his grave, you make dua to him like some people do. If he can't aid himself, how is he supposed to aid you? وقال تعالى ولا تدع من دون الله ما لا ينفعك ولا يضرك فإن فعلت فإنك إذا من الظالمين. Do not call upon other than Allah. For indeed they do not benefit you nor can they harm you. If you do so, if you call upon them, فإنك إذا من الظالمين, then you are from the wrongdoers. وقال تعالى له دعوة الحق والذين يدعون من دونه لا يستجيبون لهم بشيء إلا كباسط كفيه إلى الماء ليبلغ فاه وما هو ببالغه وما دعاء الكافرين إلا في ضلال. Those people that call upon other than Allah, the dua is not accepted. The example of you making dua to them is like you having water in front of you and you do this with your hands. Literally Allah is describing like this in the verse. You have the water in front of you, you say, come up. Go into my mouth. Is it going to come? La. That's the same way you making dua, aid me, answer my call, alleviate this. The same way the water won't come up to you, they won't answer your dua and they will have no effect. قال الله تعالى والذين يدعون من دون الله لا يخلقون شيئا وهم يخلقون أموات غير أحياء وما يشعرون أيان يبعثون. Those that they call upon from other than Allah or besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do not create anything. In fact, they themselves are created. They are dead. غير أحياء. They are not alive. وما يشعرون أيان يبعثون. وقال تعالى ذلك بأن الله هو الحق وأن ما يدعون من دونه هو الباطل وأن الله هو العلي الكبير. وقال تعالى يا أيها الناس ضرب مثل فاستمعوا له إن الذين تدعون من دون الله لن يخلقوا ذبابا ولو اجتمعوا له وإن يسلبهم الذباب شيئا لا يستنقذوه منه ضعف الطالب والمطلوب. وقال تعالى ومن يدعو مع الله إلها آخر لا برهان له به فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون. I'll mention one last verse where Allah Azza wa Jal, He says وَالَّذِينَ تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِهِ مَا يَمْلِكُونَ مِن قِطْمِيرٍ إِن تَدْعُوهُمْ لَا يَسْمَعُوا دُعَاءَكُمْ وَلَوْ سَمِعُوا مَا اسْتَجَابُوا لَكُمْ وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يَكْفُرُونَ بِشِرْكِكُمْ وَلَا يُنَبِّئُكَ مِثْلُ خَبِيرٍ. Here Allah Azza wa Jal, He says those that call upon other than Him, they do not own anything, even a qitmir, the inside of a seed. إِن تَدْعُوهُمْ, if you call upon them, لا يسمعوا دعاءكم, they cannot hear your supplication. ولو سمعوا, for argument's sake, if they were to hear, ما استجابوا لكم, even if they were to hear you, they cannot answer you, they cannot aid you. ويوم القيامة يكفرون بشرككم, and on the day of judgment, what will happen? Those people that you are supplicating, يكفرون, they will reject you, they will deny you. يَكْفُرُونَ بِشِرْكِكُمْ, they will deny you and they will deny your shirk. So Allah Azza wa Jal here, He calls their action of supplicating shirk. وَلَا يُنَبِّئُكَ مِثْلُ خَبِيرٍ, and no one can tell you of them like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he mentions a number of other verses, and he mentions the hadith of Ibn Abbas, إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ. If you ask, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So supplicating and dua is from the clearest form of worship. And giving it to other than Him is shirk, just like Allah Azza wa Jalla nassa alayh, clearly states in the Quran. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to allow us to be from those that only supplicate Him and give our actions of worship specifically to Him, and to allow us to stay away from shirk, كبيرها وصغيرها, its major and its minor. وبالله التوفيق وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.